joins Morgan Stanley with his thoughts on what to expect. And now, let's see what corporate India is expecting from the budget. You heard Narayan Murthy earlier in the show, but here's Shireen with some big CEOs sitting with her to take us through what expectation levels are like this time. Shireen, over to you.
Well, thanks very much, guys. In the 10 years that I've been functioning out of the Confederation of Indian Industries, expectations have never been as low as they are this year with regards to the expectations from the budget. I've got with me the President of the Confederation of Indian Industry, the CEO of Bharti Airtel, and of course Vinayak Chatterjee, the infrastructure rockstar as he's being called here at CII. Mr. Bhartia, let me start by asking you now, expectations very, very low this time around, but on some key things, because CII has recommended that he should not tinker with the excise duties. He should leave excise duties where they are. The economic survey also very clearly articulates that the withdrawal of stimulus should be gradual. It should not be one shot. So that's clearly music to your ears. Do you think excise is going to be rolled back completely, or it will stay where it is?
You know, I hope not. I'll tell you why. Because, you know, Finance Minister is also dealing with very high rates of inflation. And of course, interest rates are at the highest level today. So I think increasing excise duty will only impact the consumer, because industry will pass it on to the consumer.
Right.
So I don't think it is the right time. Secondly, in the GST, already we are talking about 10% excise duty and 10% service tax. So why change it for a year if we are intending to implement GST next year? So I think for Finance Minister, the important thing to deal with today is really the issues of inflation. And there are other ways to do fiscal consolidation rather than
mopping up through excise collections. All right, a quick question on the surcharge, because that's the big worry as far as corporate India is concerned, that this time around he probably will not do away with the surcharges. That's been the big expectation for the last few years. Do you think the surcharge is likely to stay or go?
I think it will stay on, if you ask me truly. The efficient thing is to remove it, but you know, he's going to do a balancing act across the board. So, well, looking at fiscal consolidation, he needs to find more sources of revenue, as well as not increase, not put extra burden on the industry. I think the challenge that on the long term that we face is really building capacity. I think that we must deal with in this budget, because increase rate of investment, and that can only come because if you have a high rate...
To get the private sector involved. And the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council has pegged it at about 15%.
You know, Shireen, you know, 10 years back our economy was much smaller. Today we are 1.7 trillion. So the base has gone up. If we have to grow at 8 to 9%, we will double up in 7 or 8 years. Now, you can imagine the capacity that is required to double up. And I think capacity also needs execution skills. And before you start executing, you need to make sure that structurally all projects get approved faster and get implemented.
So you're hoping that there will be something on that
front? Some signals on that. I don't think budget can solve all these issues.
That's right. Vinayak Chatterjee, let me come to you, because the big hope is that at least on infrastructure, which is non-controversial, there is going to be some bold moves that the Finance Minister is going to make. For years now, we've been talking about the infrastructure debt fund. There's been the Deepak Parekh committee report. We know it has the support of the Planning Commission. We know it has the support of the IRDA and the PFRDA in terms of regulators. They were looking for an anchor investor. That seems to be sorted out. Do you think the infra debt fund is finally going to happen this time around this budget?
The expectation is a resounding yes. But before that, let me just talk about the other financial expectation, which is that you would have seen that in the past few months, the offering of infrastructure bonds by the infra NBFCs, you know, IDFC, L&T, Infra Finance, and a few others, had not received the kind of response that was expected. And it is the need of the hour to channelize household savings, retail savings into long-term funds for infrastructure. So the government took note of the fact that the current packaging is not as attractive to the retail investor. Then they appointed Dr. Rakesh Mohan to do a very quick repackaging of the scheme. So I'm expecting that the output of that will be reflected in the Finance Minister's budget speech to get a far more attractive package for the retail investments. And the infra debt fund, of course, it was even announced when President Obama was here, called the $11 billion debt fund. So I'm expecting it to happen. These are the two things that
you're expecting it to happen. Sanjay Kapoor, your sector has been beleaguered through this year. Now, I think the telecom sector is just going to hope that they're not called into the CBI office every day. But besides that, what is the big wish from this budget as far as you're concerned?
Well, I would say, Shireen, first of all, it's unfortunate that an industry that has contributed so positively over the last 10, 12 years to the economic growth of this country has to go through what it has to go through. But if I was to pick up my top 3 picks, I would say now, in addition to the live infrastructure or hard infrastructure, you need the virtual infrastructure to come in place as well. And government needs to have a policy around that. We belong to an industry which connects more than 800 million people to rest of the country and to the rest of the world.
But let's be realistic. You really think he's going to announce any kind of relief, any kind of incentives for the telecom sector this year?
So, you know, what matters to us is consumption and disposable incomes. And if those goes up, then the expenditure goes up. And finally, this is an industry which probably not only has the most complex form of taxation, but has probably the highest form of taxation.
And that's been a long-standing demand to simplify the taxation structure as far as your sector is concerned.
It's simplified and comes down as well.
Sunil Munjal, you're the big picture man on this panel, so let me ask you, do you really anticipate him tinkering too much with taxes, given the fact that we've got the GST which is impending as well as the direct taxes code? Do you really think he's going to make any big differences as far as tax is concerned?
You know, he's got a tough job today. Clearly, this struggle between growth, inflation, and managing the deficit, I would expect him to play both sides.
Okay.
One on the one hand, I think some.
But do you think it's going to tilt in favor of being a pro-growth budget or an anti-inflation budget?
I'm actually hoping it will be a bit of both, because there is a reform agenda pending, which is towards both more long-term growth than immediate growth. Although the big concern right now is immediate. On that front, I have a little bit of a fear. He may pull back some of the incentives that the government had given during the crisis 2 years ago.
For instance, excise?
The excise, yes.
Yeah.
Some of the excise may actually go up
specifically
by the 2
for the auto
points.
sector, you think, considering the fact that it's been doing well?
I would imagine auto is a certain possibility in this budget to lose that advantage. Although it's actually, while it's growing, but the growth is fairly tentative right now overall in the economy, as you know. So it's a tough job at this moment.
Tough job at this moment. You spoke about reforms. The economic survey has spoken about the fact that things like FDI into multi-brand retail should be opened up. Do you think, just from a broad policy point of view, he is going to make some statements of intent as far as reform are concerned? Because it's obviously interministerial stuff, but do you think from a broad policy to send out a message to foreign investors, to Indian investors, that this government is serious about business, he's going to talk about statements of intent?
Almost definitely he will.
But on reform?
On reform. But I can tell you what my concern is. If you looked at the economic survey of last year, it
pretty much said the same thing.
Exactly. It talked of everything. Not a lot happened on that front. Of course, part of it was to do with the state of the economy. So I'm reasonably sure, given that the elections are still two years away, that this is the time. If this government has to make any big, bold move, now is the time.
So what reforms are you expecting?
I would expect an announcement of a GST date.
Okay.
I would expect some mention of FDI in the sectors where it's still held back.
Okay.
More specifically retail. Maybe, as I said, he might surprise us with a couple of others.
Okay.
I would also expect the DTC announcement would get made, although in the current state that it is, industry is not very happy with the DTC. We would like to see it come back in a form where it was originally
What
conceived.
about IFRS? Because the Ministry of Corporate Affairs has notified IFRS. It said the ball is now in the Finance Ministry's court because the tax issues have to be resolved. Do you think he's going to talk about IFRS in the budget?
I think he will. Because what they're doing is they're talking about IFRS for companies above a certain size. So which is relatively easier, because many of those companies in one form or the other are already edging in that direction.
Okay, so you do anticipate him to say something on the IFRS. I want to talk to you about petroleum, because this is the big worry. The economic survey has also spoken about how the downside risk to our growth could be on the back of the crude shock that we're currently faced with. The big expectation is that he is going to rationalize or rejig the duty structure on the petroleum side. Do you anticipate that happening?
Yeah, I think so, because presently there is a duty also on import of crude. I think they will need to do something about that, because otherwise you'll have to pass on a large part of the price increase to the consumer. So that part we need to deal with. On the other front, when you're talking about petroleum, looking at, we put large amount of subsidy into kerosene. So I think there will be a signal on the structural part that how do subsidies get distributed. I think they will look at cash in hand to the poor.
And perhaps linking more of the PDS system to the UID, for
Absolutely.
instance.
Yeah, for kerosene, for fertilizer, and even for food. I'm hoping that this announcement should take place, because I know government has set up various committees to implement that, because UID presently the numbers are small.
Yeah.
But the moment you attach cash, then you'll see faster rollout of UID.
So coupons, cash transfers, you think this
Absolutely.
budget is going to talk about that?
I think so. And this will be a strong signal that the subsidies are going to be more directed and more efficient in the next few years. It is going to take 4 or 5 years to do it,